Imaginez, il y aura 12-year-old boy vivant dans un petit quartier en l'année fin sofa. Le matin, se resserre le fait de la vallée quand tu marches sous ton père, elle en train de suivre ses brebis. La soft cling de leur col est un son vous avez entendu tous les jours de votre vie. Du pain frais et de lait de chèvre qui sont confort comme sécurité, comme maison. Then, suddenly, everything change. Vous entendez le pont de d'arche de chevaux affiche tour. Votre visage le fait pâle comme la neige. Votre mère sait pas, le pépère bala et casse de l'eau de bord. Dans ce moment, vous savez que certaines choses décèdent. Tout le monde sait exactement ce terminal au vélo. The Sultan's men have arrived. You hide behind a wooden cart and watch as the Ottoman officials climb down from their horses. Their robes are made of fine silk, spotless despite the long ride. They're holding scrolls and papers, checking names, looking around with the cold eyes of men choosing animals at a market. One of them points straight at you. Your mother falls to her knees, crying and begging in your native tongue. They don't care. They don't understand. And they don't want to. Your father doesn't speak a word. He knows trying to stop them will only get everyone in the family killed. They drag you away, saying you're being chosen to serve the Sultan. They talk about honor, about rising to greatness. But you don't feel honored. You feel broken. As the cart pulls you away from everything and everyone you've ever loved, the only sound you hear is your mother sobbing, softer and softer until it fades completely. You will never see her again. That was the start of your new life, taken to the palace as a ghum, a servant in the most powerful empire in the world. And the nightmare waiting for you behind those grand palace doors was just beginning. You'd give anything to go back to those quiet mornings in the misty valleys, watching sheep with your father, back before your world changed forever, before the horror began. But that life is gone. Before we dive deeper into these powerful, often forgotten stories of survival and suffering, consider hitting that like button and subscribing if you enjoy exploring the hidden corners of history. And let me know in the comments where you're watching or listening from. It blows my mind that people from all over the world are coming together to uncover these pieces of the past, connected by a shared curiosity that stretches across time and place. Now, the long march to Istanbul was your first taste of the harsh reality that would define your new life. You and dozens of other boys were forced to walk for weeks through harsh terrain. Food was scarce. You slept outside or in makeshift shelters that barely kept out the cold and rain. There was no comfort, no warmth, just survival. And not everyone survived. The boys who got sick, fell behind, or gave up hope were simply left behind. No one looked back. No one stopped. That was your first lesson. In the Ottoman palace system, weakness meant death. Only the strongest, the smartest, or those who could adapt quickly would make it through what was waiting ahead. The boy walking next to you, maybe 14 years old, came from a fishing village in Greece. His name was Nikos. He leaned in and told you quietly that his name would soon be taken from him. He had tried to escape on the third night of the march, but he didn't make it far. The guards caught him before he'd even reached the edge of the forest. They dragged him back in front of everyone and beat him mercilessly. His screams echoed for what felt like forever. You closed your eyes, tried to shut it out, but you couldn't. The message was loud and clear. Escape wasn't an option. Fighting back would only lead to pain. By the time you reached the outer edges of Istanbul, you had learned how to survive. You learned to walk quietly, to speak only when ordered, to keep your head down, especially when the guards started watching too closely. You had seen boys vanish in the middle of the night. Some had tried to run, others just couldn't take another day of it. Their empty spots in the line reminded you what was at stake. You could be next. When you finally saw Istanbul for the first time, it should have been a moment of awe. The towering minarets, the grand dome of Hagia Sophia, the endless halls of the palace glinting under the sun. It was beautiful. But you didn't feel wonder. You felt dread. This city wasn't your destination. It was your cage. It stood for everything that had been stolen from you. Your name, your family, your freedom, and everything you feared you'd become. And it was only the beginning. As soon as you arrived, the officials began sorting the boys. This was the first of many selections to come. The boys who survived the march were separated into groups, each based on what the officials thought they might become. The sorting process was cold and deeply humiliating. They checked your teeth like you were livestock. They tested your reflexes. They asked you to recite whatever little you knew, your letters, numbers, anything that might hint at intelligence. They measured your height, checked your skin for scars or marks, and studied your face like art critics examining a statue. The brightest and best-looking were sent to a place called the Enderun School inside the royal Topkapi Palace. Others were assigned to become janissaries, elite soldiers trained to serve the empire. But those picked for palace life, they were headed toward a very different kind of training. One that would test not just your body's strength, but your soul's ability to survive slow, methodical dehumanization. You were one of the lucky ones chosen for the Enderun School. The men who made the selection looked you over, your clear skin, your alert eyes, your quick mind, and they smiled. At the time, you thought that smile meant approval. You didn't realize yet that it was the look of men who had just claimed something valuable, not a student, but a possession. People today sometimes call the Enderun the world's first gifted school. Technically, that's true, but that label hides a much darker reality. Yes, you would study Arabic, Persian, and Turkish. You'd be taught math, astronomy, literature, and law. You'd learn to play instruments, write beautifully, and master delicate crafts. But this wasn't just school. It was training meant to reshape you from the inside out, to erase who you were and remake you into whatever the empire needed. The palace where you now lived was stunning on the outside. Polished marble halls, gold-covered rooms, and secret corridors twisting in every direction. But beneath all the beauty was danger, and you would soon learn that danger hid in every quiet hallway and behind every smiling face. Your dormitory was deep inside the palace grounds, cut off from the world outside by guards, locked gates, and layers of royal protocol. Once inside, escape was not just unlikely, it became unimaginable. You weren't a boy anymore. You were a tool, a body to mold, a mind to shape, a soul to control. And this was only the beginning. The room where you were expected to sleep looked less like a bedroom and more like a marble tomb. It was lined with rows of narrow beds, each one topped with silk sheets that felt more like restraints than comfort. That first night in the dormitory, you didn't sleep. Instead, you lay on your back, staring into the dark, listening to the sounds that would define your new life. You heard the quiet sobs of other boys, some crying into their pillows, trying not to be heard. You caught bits of whispered conversations in languages you couldn't yet understand. Footsteps echoed down the stone corridors. Older boys, supervisors, men walking through the halls long after the lights were out. In your hand, you clutched a small wooden cross, the one your mother had pushed into your palm just before they took you. It was your last link to home, to your real name, to the life you knew. But by sunrise, even that was gone. The guards had found it and taken it away, just like everything else. You were given a new name, Mesmet. They told you to forget who you used to be. Forget your parents, your village, your faith. Being Christian was no longer allowed. Converting to the empire's religion wasn't presented as a choice. It was a requirement, a cornerstone of your transformation from stolen child to obedient servant of the Ottoman state. The conversion was performed with ceremony, as if it were some grand moment of devotion. They dressed you in fine clothes and recited formal prayers. But you knew it was all for show. You said the words they made you say, but in your heart you remembered your mother singing you to sleep and your father's voice telling old stories by firelight. That part of you wasn't dead, not yet, but the most disturbing part of your time in the palace wasn't the forced religion or the endless lessons. It was the way they slowly erased who you were. Your first real lesson came from Amit, an older student who had already survived 3 years in the system. One night, he sat down on your bed without asking. His voice was calm, almost friendly, but there was something behind it that put you on edge. "You're new," he said as he rested one hand lightly on your shoulder. "You don't understand how things work here yet. But I do. I can help you. I can protect you." He looked you in the eyes, his tone smooth and steady. "The teachers listen to me. They trust my word when it comes to the younger boys. I can make sure they see you the way they should." You didn't move. You didn't speak. You were 12 years old and had never been touched by someone you didn't know. His hand was still on your shoulder, and something in your body told you to be still, to wait. Then his voice dropped, lower and softer, just above a whisper. But Amit wasn't finished. He leaned closer and said, "You'll need to show me you're grateful. There are ways boys like you can thank someone who protects them. Quiet ways, private ways, just between us." And just like that, you were cornered, faced with a terrible decision. The same one thousands of boys before you had faced. You could say no and risk being punished, shut out, and left to survive alone in a world that rewarded obedience with safety and advancement. Or you could give in, surrender the last piece of your childhood. Let them take what they wanted, because in this place, your body was something to be used in exchange for comfort, protection, or a chance at survival. There was no real choice, no right answer, only what might keep you alive one more day. The eunuchs, many of them castrated as boys themselves, held enormous authority inside the palace walls. Some carried deep scars from their own time as victims, but instead of breaking the cycle, many became its enforcers. They had survived the same abuse and now used their power to control the new arrivals, often becoming the most dangerous predators in the building. Older boys preyed on the younger ones, repeating the pattern. It was passed down like a terrible tradition, a kind of twisted initiation ritual. Once you had suffered, you earned the right to make others suffer. And the people in charge? They knew, they saw, some even participated. Officials in high positions picked the most attractive boys for their own use, knowing full well no one could stop them. There was nowhere to complain, no one who would listen, no justice, only silence. What made it all worse was that this wasn't some dark secret kept behind closed doors. These relationships, if you could even call them that, were part of palace life. It wasn't just tolerated, it was built into the system. It became normal. A boy who caught the interest of someone powerful could rise quickly. He got better food, better clothes, lighter workloads, extra tutoring. Teachers were kinder, punishments were fewer, and doors opened. All he had to do was give up his body. But if you didn't play along, if you refused, you were ignored, punished, or quietly erased from the system altogether. No one would say your name again. The damage this did to boys like you wasn't just physical, it was psychological, deep and lasting. You had already lost your name, your language, your family, and your freedom. Now, you were forced to choose how much of your soul you could afford to lose just to survive. Some boys responded by becoming experts at playing the game. They learned how to flirt, how to act charming, how to pretend they enjoyed it. They used their own abuse as a weapon to climb the ranks. Their smiles were rehearsed. Their eyes went dull. You saw this in Dmitri, another boy taken from your region. Within 6 months, he was wearing fine clothes, eating well, and getting private lessons in language and music. He smiled easily, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He never spoke of home anymore, never asked about his mother or the sea. And when new boys arrived, he looked at them with the same cold, appraising stare the officials had once turned on him. Then there was Stefanos, a Greek boy whose father had been a fisherman. He refused to play along. He said no every time. He endured the beatings, the punishments, the isolation, and slowly he faded. His spirit dimmed. He did his work. He passed his classes, but it was like he was no longer there. He had become a shadow, a body walking through halls with no soul left behind his eyes. But even without ever giving up completely, you started to feel yourself being chipped away. Every morning was a new battle. Every evening brought a new test. There was no space for rest, no place to be yourself. The palace offered no safety, only choices between humiliation and pain. It didn't matter what you wanted. The system was designed to remake you from the inside out, and it never stopped trying. Foreign visitors to the Ottoman court sometimes caught brief, unsettling glimpses of this hidden reality. Though their views were colored by their own cultural expectations, their writings still reveal the disturbing truths beneath the surface. One Venetian ambassador in the 16th century remarked on what he called the strange affection certain officials had for their young male servants. He described boys, some only 10 or 11 years old, dressed in rich silks and ornate jewelry, standing beside older men with a closeness that went far beyond anything proper. He was clearly disturbed by what he saw, but even he couldn't fully grasp what was really happening behind the scenes. A French diplomat in the 17th century was more direct. At a formal palace event, he wrote, "The young pages glide through the halls like beautiful birds in cages, their eyes lowered, their clothes bright and costly." It's hard not to notice the way certain officials watch them, possessively, even hungrily, and the way the boys look back with just a flash of fear before they quickly glance away. The emotional damage inflicted in the palace was only made worse by the physical conditions of your daily life. You lived crammed into dormitories with barely any privacy. Every action was observed. Every word might be overheard. You were constantly monitored, watched by older students, overseers, and eunuchs who enforced every rule with brutal discipline. You were woken before sunrise each day for prayers in a religion you had been forced to adopt. You ate at set hours, not starved, but never full either. The food was plain and limited, no comfort, just fuel. Your schedule was strict and unrelenting. There were lessons, chores, inspections, drills, all timed to the minute, with no time left for rest or thought. There was no room for reflection, no quiet space to process what was happening to you. Any attempt to resist, even silently, was punished. And the punishments were never just physical. They were designed to humiliate, to isolate, and to remind you that your body and mind no longer belonged to you. Punishment in the palace was common, and often designed to shame you more than hurt you. It wasn't just about pain. It was about breaking your spirit. Boys who broke the rules, speaking in their native tongues, clinging to old traditions, or simply showing too little enthusiasm for their new lives, were beaten, mocked, or locked in tiny isolation chambers barely big enough to lie down in. You saw what happened to Milos, a boy caught praying the way he'd been taught back home. They stripped him naked and made him stand in the courtyard for an entire day while other boys were ordered to laugh at him. The message couldn't have been clearer. Who you used to be wasn't just banned. It was something to be ashamed of. But there was another layer to this system. Inside the palace, a hidden economy controlled your every move. If you behaved well, earned good marks in lessons, or pleased your superiors in certain ways, you could earn small but powerful privileges. Maybe a softer blanket, maybe better food, or a chance to read a book, play an instrument, or sleep in a quieter corner of the dormitory. In this world of constant control, these tiny helping older students with their assignments earned you a bit of protection. Showing you were good at math or languages caught the attention of teachers who might shield you from abuse. You discovered that smiling at the right time, staying quiet when it counted, and acting like you belonged could bring you freedoms that, in this trapped world, felt like luxuries. Some boys did try to run, but escape was nearly impossible. The palace sat on a peninsula surrounded by water. The few who made an attempt were usually caught and made examples of. One day, you saw them drag a boy back from the shore. He'd tried to swim across the Golden Horn. When they found him, he was barely breathing. The beating that followed was public and brutal. By the end, he couldn't walk, could barely speak, and for the rest of your time there, he lived as a shadow of a person, a broken, fragile warning to everyone else. Don't even think about it. But even for those few who did escape, freedom wasn't simple. By the time they got out, they'd spent so long in the palace that their old lives had faded. Their names had changed, their languages had rusted, their faces, their bodies, even their beliefs had been altered beyond recognition. Returning home wasn't like stepping back into a memory. It was like landing in a foreign country. Some families didn't recognize their sons. Some communities rejected them, seeing only a stranger or worse, a traitor, a convert, a shameful reminder of what had been taken. These boys had no real skills to survive outside palace walls, and even if they did, they had nowhere left to go. For those who managed to escape the palace system, freedom rarely lasted. Most were captured and dragged back within days. But even the few who stayed free often found themselves lost, adrift in a world that no longer recognized them. The names they'd grown up with were gone. Their old identities had been stripped away, and what remained no longer fit anywhere. As you grew older inside the palace walls, surviving through a mix of intelligence, adaptability, and carefully measured obedience, your challenges changed. What began as survival turned into something darker, a slow, creeping realization that your very soul was being reshaped. You started to notice that the men who taught you, who disciplined you, who controlled your every move, were once boys like you. They too had been taken from their homes, molded and broken, then rebuilt into tools of the empire. That realization hit hard, because now you had a decision to make. Would you fight against this system and risk being crushed by it? Or would you accept it, even help maintain it, and become like them, part of the very machine that had stolen your childhood? It was a terrible choice, but many chose the path of survival. And that meant embracing the system, becoming part of it, watching over the next generation of boys, breaking them down the same way you had been, and ensuring that the power structure stayed intact. Then came the final stage of your palace journey, the graduation ceremony called Chikma. It marked the end of your education and the start of your new life in imperial service. You emerged as a man trained in everything the empire valued: languages, mathematics, music, diplomacy, governance. You were polished, educated, and well-spoken. But beneath all that, you were also deeply wounded. Your understanding of power was no longer clean or idealistic. It was shaped by years of abuse. You had learned that loyalty came through submission, that survival sometimes meant silence, and that in this world, relationships were always tied to power, never to trust or love. For many graduates, leaving the palace didn't mean escaping exploitation. It simply meant stepping into a new version of it. Those who became officials and bureaucrats found that politics and sexual favors were still tied together in deeply uncomfortable ways. The same dynamics you'd learned in the palace, who submits, who dominates, who protects, still controlled your adult world. Others who were assigned to military positions carried invisible wounds into battle. Some turned into ruthless enforcers of imperial authority. Others, unable to reconcile what had been done to them, lived quietly broken lives, full of pain they could never explain. The empire's elite had a very specific way of dealing with all this. They maintained a careful balance, allowing the palace system to continue while officially pretending not to see the worst of it. On paper, many forms of abuse were forbidden. In practice, as long as the palace produced skilled and loyal servants, no one asked too many questions. The human cost? That wasn't their concern. And if anyone dared to criticize the palace system from the outside, officials would dismiss them as naive. People who just didn't understand the sophistication of Ottoman education and governance. Even some respected voices inside the empire, like a prominent 16th century court historian, acknowledged the dark side. He wrote, "It is true that the palace school demands great sacrifices from its students, and that not all who enter emerge unchanged. But from this crucible of discipline and learning come the finest servants of the empire, men whose loyalty has been tested and whose talents have been sharpened to perfection. It was the empire's way of justifying everything. If you survived, you were proof that the system worked. If you were broken, you were forgotten. For many years, you served the empire with a strange mixture of pride and numbness. On the outside, you had become exactly what the palace had shaped you to be: loyal, educated, obedient. You rose through the ranks, wore fine robes, and stood in rooms where decisions were made that shaped the future of nations. But inside, something had gone quiet. The part of you that remembered your village, your family, your name, that part had been silenced long ago. You learned to carry yourself with confidence in court, to speak smoothly in multiple languages, to navigate the sharp politics of imperial life. But no amount of rank or respect could erase the truth. You had been taken, reshaped, and used, and now you were helping keep that same machinery turning. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, you'd dream of your mother's voice. Not clearly, just the sound, like a song half forgotten. You'd wake up with tears in your eyes, and no idea why. For many like you, the palace years became a memory they couldn't face. They buried them deep, never speaking of what they had gone through, even to their own children. Others, fewer, tried to expose what had happened, but they were silenced, ignored, or erased from the record. The system endured for centuries, quietly and efficiently, because it worked. It created loyal administrators, brilliant scholars, capable generals. It kept the wheels of empire turning. And it did so by consuming children. Today, these stories are rarely told. In the grand narratives of Ottoman history, the focus is on military triumphs, architectural marvels, the splendor of sultans and viziers. But behind every dome, every campaign, every royal decree, there were boys like you, taken from their homes, given new names, and forced to survive a system that fed on their youth and innocence. Some people call the Enderan School a marvel of early education, and in some ways it was. But for the boys who lived it, it was also a prison, a machine that crushed the old self and rebuilt it to serve someone else's power. Your story and the stories of thousands like you are not myths. They're history, real, painful, and often forgotten. But remembering them matters, because behind the grandeur of empires are the human beings who paid the price. So if you're still here, listening, watching, thinking, thank you. And if these stories speak to you, if they move something deep inside, I hope you'll consider subscribing and sharing this journey with others. These aren't just tales from the past. They're warnings, lessons, reminders, because history is not just what happened, it's what was felt, and what should never be forgotten. The promise of transformation and opportunity in the Ottoman palace system was a lie, one meant to hide what really happened to boys like you. What they called testing was, in reality, systematic sexual abuse. What they called discipline was the forced erasure of your identity. And the education you received came at the cost of your childhood, your sense of self, and your ability to form normal human relationships. What makes this system so disturbing is how it blended true education with exploitation so seamlessly that it became hard to separate the value from the trauma. On paper, yes, you were educated far beyond what most people could expect at the time. You were taught to read and write in multiple languages, giving you access to the broader world. You studied science and math that were considered advanced for the era. You were trained in politics, administration, and military leadership, skills that would serve you for the rest of your life. But all of that knowledge came tied to abuse. The very instructors who expanded your mind were often the same ones who violated your body. The very system that gave you a future also stole your past. And any success you might have achieved would always be shadowed by the way you were forced to earn it. This wasn't just a case of isolated abuse. It revealed something far deeper and darker about how power, sex, and violence were intertwined in pre-modern societies. The Ottomans weren't the only ones who used young people this way. Similar patterns existed in many ancient and medieval civilizations. But what made the Ottoman system stand out was how large, organized, and accepted it was. It wasn't some hidden shame, it was public policy. It was praised for its effectiveness and defended by the very people it benefited. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the system started to fade. Advances in military technology made the janissaries less important, and new ways of governing reduced the need for palace-trained bureaucrats. Changing views on morality, partly influenced by European ideas, also played a role in reshaping the institution. But for the thousands of boys who had already passed through those palace gates, these changes came far too late. They had already paid the price. Children taken from their homes, stripped of their names, trained to serve power in a system that viewed them as objects, not people. They learned to survive in a world where their physical beauty was both a prize and a threat, where intelligence was rewarded, but emotion was punished, where success required giving up parts of yourself you could never get back. Some did survive. Some even rose to incredible positions. Viziers, generals, governors. They helped shape the Ottoman Empire's path. But they did so carrying wounds no title could ever heal. Because behind the empire's golden facades and grand ceremonies were boys like you, used, reshaped, and forgotten. But the boys who left that palace, whether they rose through the ranks or disappeared into obscurity, never left it behind. They carried the scars of those years with them for life. Many of them, shaped by what they endured, continued the same cycle of abuse when they took positions of power. Others were simply lost to history. Their lives reduced to brief lines in dusty records. Their name, their place of origin, their training, their assignment, nothing more. Today, the palace where all of this took place still stands. It's a museum now, open to tourists. Visitors stroll through its grand halls, admiring the beauty, the towering ceilings, the polished marble, the elegant rooms once used by the empire's elite. They see the glory, the art, the architecture, but they don't see what's missing. The pain. The rooms where children lived, studied, and suffered say nothing now. The walls are quiet. The same corridors that once echoed with the steps of terrified young boys now host guided tours that speak of education and training. Not the trauma, not the abuse, not the stolen childhoods. No one mentions the boys who died rather than give in. No one speaks of the men who walked out of those halls, intelligent, skilled, even powerful, but emotionally hollowed, shaped by years of silence, fear, and violation. As I end this account, your story, imagined from the thousands of real lives just like it, I can't help but feel the weight of those unspoken stories. These weren't just historical statistics. They were children, real children, taken from their homes, given new names, told to forget everything that came before. Their talents were valued, but their feelings were not. Their minds were trained, but their humanity was denied. And you, the imagined boy I've followed through this story, you stand for all of them. You're the echo of every child whose story was never written down. You're the face of all the boys whose pain was never acknowledged, whose names we'll never know. Your ghost, and the ghosts of all the boys like you, still haunt those palace walls. They're reminders that behind every great empire, behind every beautiful building, and every triumphant achievement, there are lives that were broken to make it possible. And far too often, the people who paid that price were the ones who had no say at all. The true horror wasn't just the violence. It was how carefully planned it all was, how normal it became, how a whole system was built to turn children into tools and to make sure the world forgot what it cost them. It wasn't just the cruelty, it was how routine it became, how organized, accepted, and completely forgotten it was by the world that came after. You, and thousands of boys like you, lived and died inside a system that saw you not as people, but as beautiful objects, things to shape, to use, and then discard. But your story matters. It deserves more than being a strange footnote in a history book. It's a record of human strength, of surviving what no child ever should. You lived through something designed to break you, and even when everything was taken from you, your name, your family, your faith, you still endured. That quiet morning air, the sound of your feet walking into the unknown, is long gone. But your memory lives on. It reaches across time and speaks to us now. It asks us not to forget what happened behind those palace walls. It forces us to face the truth that the glory of empires was often built on the suffering of children. By remembering your story, we're not just honoring your pain. We're honoring all children who've been trapped in the gears of power. Children who were used to keep the machines of conquest running. Children who were cast aside the moment they were no longer useful. Your life is a reminder that behind every golden age, there is a shadow. And in that shadow are the young, the innocent, the voiceless, those who paid the price for someone else's power. And we must never forget them.